Hi there. I'm Alex, and I'm a student learning English. I'd love to share my English learning journey with you. It all started when I spent time in the lively and exciting city of New York. I was lucky enough to have an amazing teacher who really helped me improve my English skills. If you're someone looking to improve your English, keep reading, and I'll tell you all about how you can do it too. One bright and sunny day, I found myself on the subway in New York. I was surrounded by two friendly strangers, and even though we didn't speak the same language, it was clear they were from another country. I was just a beginner in English at the time, but I wanted to be able to speak it fluently like them. So, I gathered up my courage and decided to start a conversation with them. I spoke slowly, using simple sentences, and to my surprise, I managed to communicate with them. They were very patient and understanding. Even though our conversation was simple, it was meaningful. I told them how much I wanted to learn English, and they were really happy to hear that. As it turned out, they were from England and had just attended a conference in New York. They were heading back home. Before we said our goodbyes, they kindly gave me their contact information and even invited me to visit them in England someday. That small encounter on the subway was the beginning of my journey in learning English. From that moment, I became determined to improve my language skills. I started translating texts, watching English movies, and making sure to practice speaking for at least 2 hours every day. After about 6 months of practicing consistently, I began to notice a big improvement in my speaking abilities. However, I knew I still had more to learn, and I was eager to keep going. That's when I made the decision to travel to London and join a well-known language school to help me advance even further. I was excited for my first day of class and couldn't wait to meet my teacher and new classmates. On my first day, I met my friendly teacher, Ms. Johnson, and a group of other students who were just as enthusiastic about learning English as I was. Ms. Johnson asked us all to introduce ourselves and share a little bit about our language learning journeys. I talked about how much I loved translating songs and texts into English, but I also shared my doubts about the best way to learn the language. Ms. Johnson introduced us to a very effective way of learning that focused on something called immersion. She told us that instead of relying on textbooks and traditional methods, we would learn by fully immersing ourselves in the language. She explained that when it comes to learning a new language, communication is key. She encouraged us to speak freely, share our ideas, and not be afraid to make mistakes. She reminded us that when we were children, we learned our native language by simply speaking it. She said the same thing applies to learning English as adults. Unlike many language courses where students spend hours memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules, Ms. Johnson focused on helping us use English in real conversations. Of course, learning new words and grammar is important, but she assured us that we didn't need to study them intensively to become fluent. Our lessons were always fun and interactive. We talked about our hobbies, shared personal stories, and practiced speaking in pairs with Ms. Johnson. Every class felt like an enjoyable experience, and I found myself speaking more English than I ever had before. I was amazed at how much progress I made using this immersive method. It was a refreshing and natural way to learn new words and grammar. I always looked forward to the next class, excited to keep improving. So, if you're passionate about learning English, remember that communication is key. Make the most of every chance to speak, exchange ideas, and express yourself. Learning a language is a journey filled with growth and discovery, and with dedication and regular practice, you can achieve fluency. Moving forward to Lesson 2, which happens on a Wednesday, one of my classmates asks a very interesting question. They want to know what the best way is to learn new words. Our teacher responds with an answer based on research. She explains that one of the most effective ways to increase your vocabulary is through reading. According to studies, people who read while learning a new language improve their language skills twice as fast as those who don't. Reading allows you to see words in context, which helps them stick in your memory. To make the most out of reading, it's important to choose material that you find enjoyable and interesting. It could be a fascinating story, an article about your hobbies, or even something related to your job. The key is to read for at least 30 minutes each day. Now, let me give you some tips on how to get the most out of your reading time. It's a good idea to pick texts where you already know most of the words. This will keep you from getting frustrated and help you stay motivated to continue reading. When you encounter a word you don't understand, you can look it up in a dictionary. There's no need to write down every new word or make long lists. Your main goal is to understand the general meaning of the text. Once you've looked up a word and understood its meaning, you can move on without worrying too much about it. The more you read, the more naturally new words will come to you. Another great thing about reading is that it doesn't just help you learn new words, it also shows you how words fit together in sentences. This will help you get better at linking words and making sentences that make sense. You'll also notice how words change depending on their role in the sentence. This method of learning new vocabulary is very effective, so try it out, and you'll see how quickly your vocabulary can grow. After we finish talking about the best ways to learn English, our lesson shifts to a new topic: jobs that are suitable for students. This part of the lesson is especially interesting to me because I'm hoping to find a job once my classes are over. I ask my classmates if they know where I can look for work, and they suggest I go to a job center. They tell me that job centers offer a variety of positions that are perfect for students. Excited by this idea, I'm glad to know where I can start looking for a job. As soon as my school day ends, I make my way to the job center. I'm not sure what kind of jobs they will have, but I approach a kind lady there and ask for help. She tells me that they have several options available, including jobs as a cafe cleaner or a waiter. Even though I have no experience, She assures me that my English skills are good enough for me to work as a waiter. She also explains that being a waiter is a great way to practice English, and the training is quite simple. She offers me a job starting on Thursday, and I happily accept the offer. I'm excited to have found a job where I can earn money and improve my English at the same time. Always remember, if you want to learn new words effectively, try to spend at least 30 minutes reading every day. Let's move on to Lesson 3, which happens on a Thursday. I find myself back at school with my classmates. Among them, there is a quiet student from South Korea. When our teacher asks if anyone has any questions, this student bravely raises his hand. He talks about how he struggles with pronunciation, even though he reads English well and watches English films with good understanding. He knows his speaking needs improvement. He explains that he wants to speak more clearly and asks if there are any good ways to improve his pronunciation. Our teacher listens and then shares some useful advice on pronunciation, which can help all of us in the class. First, she explains why pronunciation can be difficult for people learning English. Speaking involves the use of mouth muscles, and sometimes people from other countries use their mouth muscles differently than native English speakers. This is why their pronunciation can sound different. Even though people can still understand them, there is always room to get better. Then, our teacher introduces us to a helpful method called shadowing. Shadowing is a simple but powerful way to improve pronunciation. It involves listening to someone speak and repeating what they say right after you hear it. Just like how children learn their first language by copying their parents, we can use the same approach to get better at speaking English. To practice shadowing, you should find a video or audio recording that isn't too fast and that you can easily understand. Then, listen to the speaker and try to copy their sounds as closely as you can. It's a simple technique, but very effective. To show us how shadowing works, our teacher goes to YouTube and finds a video that demonstrates the technique. We all watch the video together, and then we try shadowing for about 3 minutes. It's fun, and I can already feel how useful this method is. Our teacher also tells us that shadowing is a great tool when preparing for an English presentation. If you spend about 10 minutes shadowing before your presentation, it can help you speak more clearly and sound more like a native English speaker. I find the shadowing method very interesting because I've never heard of it before. After the lesson ends, I go to the school reception to ask about sports activities. I tell the receptionist that I'd like to play sports while I'm in England. She informs me that the school has both a table tennis team and a football team. I'm excited to hear that the football team has practice later today at 5 p.m. I love sports, so I quickly join the football team for their training session. During the training, I meet players from all over the world, including Brazil, Japan, Russia, Spain, Argentina, and Italy. I really enjoy the practice and feel lucky to have started my time in England in such a positive way, with a great teacher and new friends from the football team. I'm excited to see what comes next. If you want to improve your pronunciation, Just remember to practice repeating after native speakers. Let's move on to Lesson 4, which takes place on a Thursday. I'm back at school for this lesson, and we have a new student in class. Her name is Sarah, and she comes from France. At the start of the lesson, our teacher asks Sarah to share a little about her life. The teacher actually remembers Sarah from a year ago when she was in a beginner's class for just 2 weeks during the summer. When Sarah starts to speak, her English is surprisingly good. Her pronunciation is clear and she speaks fluently. The teacher is really impressed and asks Sarah where she learned to speak English so well. Sarah explains that she didn't go to a language school or take any other classes. Instead, she learned English at home by following the advice and techniques our teacher gave her last summer. Sarah says she did a lot of reading and practiced shadowing, which means repeating what someone says in English. She also used a technique called thinking aloud. What made a big difference for her was that she started to think more in English than in her native language, French. That shift helped her improve a lot. Sarah says that those 2 weeks in our teacher's class showed her the right way to practice English every day. That's why she wanted to come back to this class to continue learning from our teacher. Last year, she was a beginner, but now she can speak English with confidence. Sarah shares that she's really excited to keep learning. Hearing this, our teacher is delighted. She thanks Sarah for sharing her story and is clearly happy with Sarah's progress. I find Sarah's experience fascinating because I already know that reading and shadowing are important for learning English, but Sarah mentioned thinking aloud, and that catches my attention. I ask the teacher to explain more about this thinking aloud technique. The teacher describes it as a simple but powerful method, though it requires strong motivation to learn English. She admits that some people might find it a bit strange at first, but it can really help improve English quickly. I tell the teacher that I'm very motivated and willing to try anything that helps, even if it's a bit unusual. I'm eager to learn, so I ask her to teach us how to use this technique. The teacher explains that thinking aloud is actually quite simple. All day long, we think in our own language. That's just how our brains work. But with this technique, we try to think in English instead of our native language. When we have a thought in English, we say it out loud. That's it. I comment that it sounds easy, and the teacher agrees. She emphasizes that while it seems simple, it's a powerful way to improve. Curious to know more about how this technique works in practice, the teacher suggests that we ask Sarah about her experience. Sarah is happy to share. She admits that it wasn't easy when she first started. She began with very simple sentences like, "I can speak English," or "It's good that I can speak English." At the beginning, she found it difficult to think in English because the thoughts she had in French were long and complex. She had to simplify her ideas to express them in English. This was the hardest part for her, but with practice, Sarah became more comfortable thinking in English. Eventually, it felt natural to her. Then something exciting happened. She met a man from Canada who was on vacation in France. Even though she was still a beginner, Sarah was able to talk to him in English. Her sentences were short and simple, but the practice of thinking aloud helped her speak without having to translate from French to English in her head. She realized that this technique was helping her speak more smoothly. Meeting this man from Canada motivated her even more to continue practicing thinking aloud because it had clearly improved her ability to express herself. Sarah says she still uses this technique every day and believes it's a very powerful tool for learning English. Our teacher thanks Sarah for sharing her experience. I feel inspired by Sarah's success, and I decide that I will also start using the thinking aloud technique. I want to become a better English speaker, and if this technique helped Sarah so much, I believe it can help me too. If my goal is to become fluent in English, thinking aloud seems like the perfect way to get there. In Lesson 5, we focus on learning grammar in a practical way. After school, I go to a nearby cafe where I start my job training. Since this is my first time working in a cafe, I don't really know what to expect or if I will be good at the job. When I arrive, I am surprised to see that the cafe is very modern. They serve all kinds of drinks, including coffee and tea, and even offer chocolate cakes and sandwiches. My boss, Sarah, is only 25 years old, but already has more than 2 years of experience working at the cafe. She knows a lot about the job and is very good at it. Sarah shows me how to make coffee, wash the dishes, and talk to customers. It's all new to me, and I can only remember about 20% of the things she teaches me, but she is patient and allows me to practice. When I make mistakes, she gently corrects me. Thanks to her helpful attitude, I am able to learn quickly. By the end of my first day at work, I am tired because I had to take in so much new information. Even though I'm exhausted, I feel thankful for having a job. The next day is Friday, so I go back to school. In class, one of my classmates asks a very good question about how to improve their grammar. They explain that they often feel unsure when they are speaking, especially when it comes to using correct grammar. Our teacher listens and says, there are 2 different groups of students in the class, those who want to speak English fluently and those who are preparing for exams. For the students who want to speak English fluently, our teacher advises not to worry too much about grammar. The teacher explains that, just like we learned our native language, we can learn English grammar naturally by using it. Reading a lot of English books and articles is a great way to pick up grammar without even realizing it, because you see how sentences are put together. Our teacher also mentions a technique called shadowing, where you repeat sentences out loud. This helps you use correct grammar without needing to memorize any rules. But for those who still want to study grammar while improving their speaking, the teacher suggests visiting a website that shows important grammar rules at different levels of English learning. The second group of students is those who are studying for exams. For them, the teacher says it's important to focus on exam-related materials. one helpful tip is to get past versions of the exam to practice with. While the real exam might not be exactly the same, the structure usually remains similar, so it's good preparation. The teacher advises taking the exam only when practice shows they are ready for it. The classmate thanks the teacher for the advice and says that they are happy to know that they don't have to spend too much time on grammar. They mainly want to learn English to speak fluently and enjoy reading, so they appreciate being able to learn grammar naturally by reading books. After class, they visit the grammar website to check out the rules and examples for their level. That afternoon, they return to work for their second day. They already feel more comfortable doing the tasks by themselves. However, Sarah is always there to help if they need it. They realize that the job is not too difficult, and that working at the cafe gives them the chance to practice English while talking to customers. To keep improving their grammar, they remind themselves to continue reading a lot. Lesson 6. Testing your English skills. It's Monday again, and I make my way to school as usual. Our teacher starts by asking everyone about their weekend. When it's my turn, I tell the class that I worked on Saturday. I also share how happy I am with my progress at work and how comfortable I feel speaking to customers. One of the girls in class notices something different about the way I speak. She says my pronunciation has gotten much better. I smile and thank her for the compliment. I explain that I spent Saturday evening and all of Sunday practicing a technique called shadowing, trying to mimic native speakers. Even though my pronunciation isn't perfect yet, I'm pleased to see how much I've improved in such a short time. Our teacher then asks if anyone else has tried shadowing. 3 students raise their hands. One of them is a student from South Korea who says that she also finds shadowing very helpful. Another student talks about her experience and mentions that her mouth starts to hurt after just 5 minutes of shadowing. She says that sometimes it's hard to keep up with the speed of the recording. The teacher praises their efforts and explains that it's actually a good sign if your mouth hurts after 5 minutes of shadowing. It means you're working the right muscles. It's similar to when you go to the gym and your muscles ache after your first workout. The muscles in your mouth also need training to get used to this new way of speaking. The teacher advises that if your mouth starts to hurt, take a short break after 5 minutes and then try again. Over time, with each practice session, your pronunciation will get better. The teacher also talks about other benefits of shadowing. Not only does it help you with pronunciation, but it also improves your intonation, rhythm, and the way you connect words in sentences. At first, the recordings might seem too fast, but you can begin by repeating just the first or last word of each sentence. As you practice more, you'll find it easier to repeat more words. I agree with this because I found shadowing very difficult on Saturday, but by Sunday evening, it had already become much easier for me to repeat what I was hearing. Later in the class, I asked the teacher a question about a website called gggrammar.com. I think it's a helpful site, but I don't know how to determine my English level because I'm not sure how many words I know. The teacher then asks the other students if they know how many words they know in English. To my surprise, no one knows the answer. We all know we're intermediate students, but none of us know the exact number of words we've learned. Our teacher suggests a different website that can help us figure this out. It's called bestlanguages.com, and it offers a simple test that tells you how many words you know. The test is easy, with just 2 steps, and you can take it every month to track your progress. Excited to find out, I take the test right away. It turns out that I know 2,000 words in English. Most students in the class know between 2,000 and 2,200 words. However, Monica and the student from South Korea score higher, with 2,500 words each. The teacher reminds us that when using gggrammar.com, we should be comfortable with grammar from levels 1 and 2 before moving on to level 3. Level 3 is designed for students who know between 3,000 and 4,000 words, so it's important to keep testing our progress every month. Lesson 7. Overcoming mistakes. On Tuesday, I went back to school, and one of my classmates asked our teacher a question that really got me thinking. She said that she wanted to start practicing her English by talking to the people around her, but she was scared. She worried that if she made mistakes, she would look silly. She asked our teacher for advice on how to deal with this fear. Our teacher responded by saying that making mistakes is a really interesting topic and that many people have different opinions about it. Drawing from personal experience, our teacher shared their thoughts. Having learned several languages over the years, they are now studying Spanish and have picked up a lot of valuable lessons. Our teacher explained that when they speak Spanish, they don't worry too much about getting things wrong. They compared it to when they first learned their own native language as a child. Back then, they didn't focus on mistakes either. The main goal, they said, is to communicate ideas. According to our teacher, if you read a lot, speak regularly, and try shadowing, which means repeating what you hear to practice, your language skills will get better. It might sound really simple, but it works for them and has worked for many students over the years. When our teacher has conversations in Spanish, they focus on what they want to say at that moment, rather than worrying about mistakes. They shared that their Spanish vocabulary is about 5,100 words right now, which they compare to the vocabulary of a 2-year-old child. 2-year-olds, they pointed out, make a lot of mistakes when they speak, but that doesn't stop them. They keep using their language, and by the time they are 3 years old, they make fewer mistakes. By age 4, they speak pretty well with very few errors. Our teacher encouraged all of us to adopt the same attitude. Most of us in class already know around 2,000 words in English, which is a good amount. It's okay to make mistakes sometimes, because as we keep using English, the number of mistakes will go down. Our teacher reminded us that no one can improve without making mistakes. Learning English is like learning how to play a musical instrument. At first, it might sound rough, and you'll make mistakes, but that's part of getting better. If we try to avoid making mistakes, we'll never move forward to the next level. The only way to get better is to practice what we want to learn, and over time, our mistakes will happen less and less. Our teacher also said that we can make fewer mistakes by reading a lot and practicing shadowing. Reading aloud can help us feel more confident and make fewer errors when we have real conversations. The key is to focus on the ideas we want to share, not on whether we're making mistakes. Speaking is all about turning our thoughts into words. Grammar and vocabulary can be improved through practice and other activities. Our teacher reminded us that everyone who learns a new language makes mistakes, even famous people like CEOs and politicians. If you watch them on TV, you'll notice that they focus more on getting their ideas across than on being perfect. The student who asked the question thanked the teacher and said she now understood how important it is to read and shadow in order to make fewer mistakes. Lesson 8. How to remember new words. On Wednesday, I returned to school, and at the start of our lesson, one of my classmates brought up an important question. They shared that they have been reading more lately and noticed that their grammar is improving. However, they have a problem when it comes to learning new words. Even though they look up the meaning of a word in the dictionary, they still have trouble remembering it the next time they see it. They asked our teacher for advice on how to get better at remembering new words. Our teacher listened carefully to the question and gave a helpful answer. The teacher said it's completely normal to forget a new word after learning it just once. In fact, it's common to need several encounters with a word before it sticks in our memory. According to the teacher, most words need to be looked up around 5 times before they really stay in our minds. Some words, especially verbs, can take even longer to remember, sometimes needing 10 to 15 encounters before we feel comfortable using them. To make the process clearer, our teacher explained that words go through 5 stages before we can remember and use them easily. Let's go over these 5 stages. Stage 1. The first time you see a new word, you don't know what it means, so you look it up in the dictionary. Stage 2. You see the word again later. You feel like you've seen it before, but you still can't remember what it means, so you look it up once more. Stage 3. You keep seeing the word, and now you start to have a guess about what it might mean. You might think it refers to something like an animal, an object, or maybe an action, but you're not completely sure. Stage 4. At this point, you understand the meaning of the word when you see it, but when you try to use it in your own speech, you can't quite remember it. This means the word is now part of your passive vocabulary. You know it when you see it, but aren't ready to use it on your own yet. Stage 5. Finally, you get to the stage where you can confidently use the word when you speak or write. At this point, the word is fully part of your active vocabulary. Congratulations, you've mastered it. By understanding these 5 stages, it becomes clear why it's hard to remember a word after only seeing it once. It takes time, and we need to go through each stage slowly. The more you see or hear the word, the more it moves through these stages until it reaches the 5th stage, where you can use it easily. It's important to celebrate each step, not just when you fully know the word, but also when you move from one stage to the next. Every step brings you closer to being able to use the word naturally in conversation. The student felt grateful for this new understanding. They explained that they had often been frustrated after looking up a word and then forgetting it shortly after. Now they realized it's normal to need repeated exposure to a word in order to remember it well. The student ended by excitedly mentioning that they have a football match on Saturday where they've been invited to play on the school team. So remember, if you want to remember a new word, aim to see or hear it around 10 times. This repetition will help make the word stick in your memory. Keep practicing, and you'll get better at learning new words. Lesson 9. How to improve listening skills. The day after my last lesson, I went back to school. One of my classmates asked an important question about how they could improve their listening skills in English. They wanted to know the best ways to get better at understanding what people are saying. Our teacher was happy to hear the question and said that listening well is a key part of good communication. If we don't understand what others are saying, it becomes difficult to have meaningful conversations with them. The teacher explained that there are many resources available on the internet for people learning English, but some students might find it hard to pick the right materials that match their level. To help with this, our teacher gave us advice on what kinds of materials we should listen to. There are 2 main types: audio materials like recordings or podcasts, and films or videos. When listening to audio materials, the teacher suggested that we should understand at least 95% of the words. If we don't understand too many words, it can be hard to follow along. To help with this, the teacher advised us to read any text that comes with the audio beforehand. This way, we know what to expect and can follow along better. The goal of listening practice is to get information from what we hear rather than just learning new words. While we might learn some new words, that's not the main point of the practice. Our teacher recommended choosing materials that match our current level of English. For example, we can use books written in simpler English along with audio recordings that come with those books. This will allow us to pick materials that suit our level. The teacher mentioned 2 great books for this: Robinson Crusoe and The Little Prince. Additionally, if we're interested in news, we can visit a website called newsannals.com, which has news stories in 3 different levels of English. The second type of listening material is films and videos. Once we know at least 2,000 English words, our teacher suggested watching films on a website like YouTube. At first, we should watch films with subtitles so we can follow the story. As we improve, we can try watching without subtitles. If we really like a film, we can watch it several times to help us understand more of it. Besides films, watching videos about interesting topics like nature documentaries or reality shows is another great way to practice. Reality shows are especially good because they often have the same type of conversation, so they are easier to understand. Finally, our teacher reminded us that we should practice listening for at least 30 minutes every day. The more we listen, the faster we will understand English words and phrases. It's important to focus on what we already know, even if we don't understand everything at first. By celebrating each new sentence we understand, we can stay motivated and not feel discouraged about the words we don't know yet. At the end of the lesson, the student thanked the teacher for the helpful information. They said they were excited to learn more about listening and felt ready to start improving their listening skills. The student promised to spend at least 30 minutes each day listening to English. Lesson 10. Why Motivation Matters. On Friday, our class had a very interesting discussion. Our teacher asked us, "What made you want to start learning English?" Can you think of the exact moment when you really became interested in the language? I told the class that I could remember that moment clearly. I explained that when I was younger, English was not my favorite subject, and I had a hard time with it. In high school, the grammar rules felt confusing, and I found it difficult to remember all the words and their meanings. After finishing high school, I was still at a beginner level. I couldn't speak English fluently, and I thought I might never fully understand the language. But then something changed. When I was 20 years old, I started listening to the Beatles. I wanted to know what the words in their songs meant, so I began translating their lyrics into my own language. Slowly, my understanding of English began to improve. Another important moment for me was when I talked with two English women on a train. That conversation gave me a lot of confidence. It made me feel like I could actually learn English. From that point forward, I decided to dedicate myself to getting better at English. I started practicing nearly every day, and I saw myself making progress bit by bit. Eventually, I made the decision to visit England, where I could keep improving my skills. I told the class how grateful I was to my teacher for giving me the chance to share my story. After I finished speaking, our teacher pointed out something interesting. They noticed that at first, I didn't have much motivation to learn English. But once I found something I loved, the Beatles' music, my motivation grew, and I made much faster progress. The teacher talked about how important motivation is when you're learning a language. When you have something that motivates you, learning becomes easier and more enjoyable. Without motivation, it's much harder to improve. Next, our teacher asked the rest of the class to share their reasons for learning English. The stories we heard were all different and fascinating. One student said they wanted to read history books in English, while another dreamed of becoming a professional tennis coach in England. This student wanted to be able to speak perfect English before they started their coaching career. Another classmate said they wanted to work for a large international company, and they knew that learning English would help them in that job. It became clear that each of us had our own unique reasons for wanting to learn English. Whether it was to use the language in real life or to gain knowledge from English language books, everyone in the class had their personal motivation. Toward the end of the lesson, our teacher asked if we now enjoy learning English. I shared that while I didn't like English in high school, I've come to really appreciate it. I now see how useful it is, and I'm grateful for the things it has allowed me to enjoy. For example, I can fully appreciate the Beatles' songs, understand English humor, and have good relationships with my teacher and my English-speaking boss. Our teacher said that liking something about English, whether it's the music, the culture, the history, or the people, can make the learning process a lot easier. I completely agreed with my teacher. I said that my new love for English has made it easier for me to practice every day. I now look forward to learning and using the language. For example, I also play football on my school's team every Saturday. Last week, we won our match 3-2, and afterward, we went to celebrate at a local pub. In conclusion, it's clear that motivation plays a big role in learning English. Finding a reason to use the language makes the whole process much easier and more rewarding. Lesson 11. Learning 3,000 words. In our next lesson, a student asked the teacher a question about learning 3,000 words. They wanted to know where they could find the most important 3,000 words in English. The teacher explained that searching for a list of the 3,000 most common words in English might not be very useful. Learning words from a list means you're learning them without seeing how they fit into sentences. This can lead to a problem because you may understand the word by itself, but not know how to use it correctly in real conversations. For example, if you learn simple words like mother, father, apple, blue, or dog, you might not need to see them in sentences to understand their meaning. These are basic words that are easy to learn because they represent things we see in our everyday lives. However, if you try to learn more difficult words like appreciate or suppose from a list, it becomes much harder to understand how to use them properly. This is because these words are more abstract and are often used in specific ways when combined with other words in sentences. Many students make the mistake of thinking that learning from word lists will help them speak English fluently. They may start by memorizing a list of 1,000 or 2,000 words. At first, this seems helpful, but after a while, they notice that they still can't use. The words are fully part of your active vocabulary. Congratulations, you've mastered it. By understanding these 5 stages, it becomes clear why it's hard to remember a word after only seeing it once. It takes time, and we need to go through each stage slowly. The more you see or hear the word, the more it moves through these stages until it reaches the 5th stage, where you can use it easily. It's important to celebrate each step. not just when you fully know the word, but also when you move from one stage to the next. Every step brings you closer to being able to use the word naturally in conversation. The student felt grateful for this new understanding. They explained that they had often been frustrated after looking up a word and then forgetting it shortly after. Now they realized it's normal to need repeated exposure to a word to remember it well. The student ended by excitedly mentioning that they have a football match on Saturday where they've been invited to play on the school team. So remember, if you want to remember a new word, aim to see or hear it around 10 times. This repetition will help make the word stick in your memory. Keep practicing, and you'll get better at learning new words. Lesson 9. How to improve listening skills. The day after my last lesson, I go back to school. One of my classmates asks an important question about how they can improve their listening skills in English. They want to know the best ways to get better at understanding what people are saying. Our teacher is happy to hear the question and says that listening well is a key part of good communication. If we don't understand what others are saying, it becomes difficult to have meaningful conversations with them. The teacher explains that there are many resources available on the internet for people learning English, but some students might find it hard to pick the right materials that match their level. To help with this, our teacher gives us advice on what kinds of materials we should listen to. There are two main types: audio materials like recordings or podcasts, and films or videos. When listening to audio materials, the teacher suggests that we should understand at least 95% of the words. If we don't understand too many words, it can be hard to follow along. To help with this, the teacher advises us to read any text that comes with the audio beforehand. This way, we know what to expect and can follow along better. The goal of listening practice is to get information from what we hear rather than just learning new words. While we might learn some new words, that's not the main point of the practice.